This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice or mental health care. Please seek help from a trusted counselor or call or text 988 if you are in crisis.
Welcome to All Start, where we share our story, listen with compassion, and connect through our faith and mental health experiences. Following this story, Morgan and I will offer insights that connect faith and mental health. We invite you to practice listening and understanding during this episode so that when someone shares their story with you in real time, you'll be ready. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's start this journey together.
My name is Dustin, and I'll start. My biggest fear in telling my story it's definitely judgment. My big thing was I was so concerned with what other people would think of what I was going through, of who I was, that I would be judged. And it's like, it is so much more than that. And so overcoming that hurdle is definitely something. Like, most of the conversations I had, especially my first few years of sobriety, were with other addicts. No matter what that addiction or substance may be, you truly do not feel like you're being judged, and you're hearing other people's struggles as they try to get sober. And that helped in a tremendous way. Like, if I had a hard day, I could go and jump into an AA meeting, which they're all over the place. You can always find one no matter what time of day it is, online or in person. The fear that others will think less of me because of my past, especially in a church setting, is definitely a fear. Churches there is a general thought that people in churches can be judgy. And that's not something everybody wants to hear, but growing up, at least in my mind, those in the church sometimes feel like they are perfect, or they have that tendency. It's like, yeah, I'm not perfect. But, and so I think that's a big part of one of the things that keeps people out of the church. It's stepping into this space where you may not feel like you're welcomed. And so opening up about my story, which is far from squeaky clean, is a little bit of a fear. And that fear has dwindled as I've begun working at the church, because I've gotten to know people. Now I've been able to open up, and everybody's been extremely accepting. And so that's what makes having this conversation so much easier. I mean, that was the general thing when I was drinking, but I was a closet alcoholic. Because I was so incredibly ashamed of what people would think of me, because I thought myself that I was a loser, that I wasn't any good to society, that I was a liar. That in turn, lying and holding that all in became crippling and turned into severe anxiety. And so that is very much, like, those feelings are very much what I think other people are thinking of me at times when I say I struggle with addiction, or I struggle with addiction, because I still do. Something in AA they say is basically, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. You are always going to be an alcoholic. And so I'll tell people, I'm a recovering alcoholic, or I used to be an alcoholic, and in reality, I am an alcoholic. I still have to watch it. There are still moments where a drink sounds amazing, and I can't do that because it will lead down a real bad path, most likely very quick. And a lot of the time you hear people overdosing because of that, because they come back into it with the mentality that they can drink or use whatever substance it is like they did before, and their body is not able to handle that like it used to. And next thing you know, you're no longer here. So you really got to be careful with it. I want to tell my story because hopefully it will give those other people the courage to step forward when they're in a low point, to talk to somebody and not have the fear that I had, because I was drinking for 8 years every single day, living a lie. I don't want others to feel like they're closed in this box. And so changing that stigma of, if you get help, you're weak. That's super important. I mean, even talking to different generations, talking to some older generations, they just almost seem confused when you open up to them. And it's like, this is important. Like, we need to talk about this. If we don't talk about it, then the same thought of just holding everything in, which was huge in my family, continues. And we've got to break that boundary somehow, because otherwise things aren't going to get better. The bulk of the people are not going to judge you. And that's what I've learned. If anything, they're actually encouraging. And that's like straight off the bat, like whether it be 24 hours or a week or a month or 5 years. Like I'm about to hit 2,000 days in like a few days here. So I'm stoked on that. What I remember is I went from a relatively small school to a bigger school, and the switch from 5th grade to 6th grade to a bigger middle school. I was surrounded by people I didn't know. I was having a really hard time finding a place to fit in. My anger was through the roof. I felt like I was constantly getting in fights, constantly getting in trouble. And at home, I was kind of doing the same thing to my parents, just treating them disrespectfully. And my guess is I said something along the lines of, I want to kill myself or something like that. And I remember my mom coming to the school and picking me up and bringing me to a therapist. And I was furious. Because I'm like, I don't need help. I'm not crazy. And I may not have meant it, but just the fact that I said it, I feel like there were thoughts there that were, hey, everyone would be better off if I were dead. I don't think I ever wanted to act on it. My anxiety was also pretty high. Those years were hard. Like my relationship with my mom was not good. Not anything on her part, truly just because I was a hard kid. And I wanted to revolt in any way I could, I guess. I don't know. I'm guessing I was angry just because I was bullied. I was treated poorly at school. I wasn't finding a great place to fit in. The group that I did feel like I fit in with was not great. I mean, I remember kids in middle school that were my friends, like smoking weed and having sex. And that was middle school. And now that I look back on it, I'm like, that's insane. But fortunately, I didn't go down that rabbit hole at that age. Thank God. But I really think the bullying is a big part of what led to my anger. Like I said, I was getting in fights pretty often. I would always get in trouble. Really, any way to rebel was kind of, I guess, how I was getting attention. I remember one time that stood out, though, and I don't know if I should admit this or not, but there was a girl in our class, and I don't remember why. I don't know why, actually, but the end of the school day came around, and she came up and punched me in the gut so hard I felt like I was going to vomit. And I remember there was another girl in my class that was super sweet and came up and, said, "Are you okay?" I, of course, was like, "Oh, I'm fine," but in reality, it hurt like crazy. No idea why she punched me. She just didn't like me. So middle school was hard. By the time I was in high school, I felt like I found a group of friends that I stuck with all through high school. I had hobbies that kept me busy, and things really kind of seemed to turn around. So going into my senior year, I did a lot of skateboarding. and I had a fall that fractured my back in a couple of places. I remember I was like on crutches when I turned 17 because of this injury. So it was something that started out as like some knee pain, and then it just gradually got worse to the point to where I could barely walk, and I was waiting to get into surgery. The doctors at the time were giving me Vicodin daily, multiple times a day. And so I remember talking to my friends, they're like, when you did show up to class, you were asleep during class, and I didn't even realize it. So I was just high on opiates for 4 months or 5 months or whatever it was. In that same time, my grandmother passed away of cancer. It came on pretty quick. We were really close to her. It took a toll on the whole family. I did have my surgery. I was able to walk. I was able to move. I remember when I did have the surgery, they were no longer filling script for opiates because I didn't need them anymore. But I did have withdrawals because I was on opiates for so long. So I started smoking weed, started out on the weekends, and then after I graduated high school, I was smoking weed from basically the second I woke up to the second I went to bed, and I did that all through summer. And so I think that summer was when we started drinking periodically. So I was 18, and then I continued on with that kind of like smoking weed and drinking periodically up until I was 20. And then I got a DUI for smoking weed. So I was high. And so I was on probation for 2 years, and I couldn't smoke weed anymore. So what doesn't show up on a drug test? Alcohol. And so I messed around with pills a little bit. I was basically messing around with anything that wouldn't show up on a drug test. Because for some reason I couldn't be sober. And I believe it was around that time that I started drinking pretty much daily, and it wasn't beer, it was vodka. And so this would have been 2013. I would have started drinking vodka almost daily, and I did that up until 2020. During that time, I was hiding it the whole time. And my wife and I, we met in 2010, got married in 2019. That whole time, she knew I would drink, but she didn't know the extent of what it was. My family didn't know the extent of what it was. My coworkers didn't know the extent of what it was. I truly was a closet alcoholic. And then I was working night shift, so I'd go home at 11 o'clock or midnight, whatever time it was, and I'd drink until 3 a.m. and I'd get up and do it all over again. At first, it was doable, I guess. Like, the hangovers weren't terrible. I guess I was young enough. My body was doing what it was supposed to do and breaking it down. But it got to the point where I remember I had a doctor tell me, you've got to quit drinking. Your kidneys and liver are going to shut down. And after that, I ignored my doctor, and I kept doing exactly what I was doing. But at that point, anxiety really started to kick in, because I was like, my body's not happy at me for doing this. I know I need to quit, but I couldn't quit. And I'm like, I'm killing myself. But I wasn't quitting. And I couldn't quit. There were stretches where I would quit for like a month. And then I'd be like, okay, today was crazy. I deserve this. So I'd get a little bottle of vodka, and I'd drink that. And then those 3 shots would turn into 8 shots, like a week later. And it just went right back into it. That almost seemed to trigger anxiety to the point to where, like, anytime I felt something weird in my body or like anything felt a little off, I was like, I'm dying. And that eventually turned into panic attacks. And I remember having to pull over a couple of times just driving to work, because I'd feel my heart racing, and then I'd feel like I couldn't catch my breath. And now I know that was a mild panic attack. That happened pretty regularly. Like, I was kind of scared to go anywhere because I felt like one of these episodes was going to happen. And that lasted for probably 4 years before I got sober. Any time a big life change happened, like moving out of my parents or getting engaged or getting married, it was always, I'm going to quit before I do this. And my wife deserves better than this. And it never happened. Instead, this anxiety just kept building. So after we got married, we were living together. And of course, she caught on very quick. Because you can't hide it from a person you're living with, you know. Like I said, I was working second shift. I would get home around midnight. She was always asleep. I'd drink when she was in bed and get up and pretend like everything was fine. But of course, she figured it out. She did end up walking out after we fought about it back and forth, and she kept telling me to get help, go to rehab. I wasn't doing it. I didn't want to get sober. So eventually she moved out 2 weeks before the pandemic hit in 2020. We started working from home. When I was working from home, that gave me an excuse. I was already miserable. I was already drinking way more than before because I was like, my life's falling apart. And I knew it was because of alcohol. I knew what I needed to do to fix it, and I couldn't do it. And when I was working at home, I was literally drinking from the second I woke up to the second I went to bed. And this all culminated to me drinking to the point to where I didn't have the energy to go to the store and buy more alcohol. And I don't remember exactly what happened. I was basically on like a binge for a couple weeks, and my parents knew what was going on. They were concerned about me. They kept coming to my house, knocking on the door. I wouldn't answer. At some point, I did have a conversation with them when I was getting to the bottom of my bottle, and I was like, you guys can come over tomorrow. And so they came over that day. I was seriously so weak. I was maybe like 135, 140 pounds. I stopped eating. And they eventually talked me into going back to their house. And I was like, okay. My plan was to go there long enough to get strong enough to where I could be sober enough to buy more alcohol. And my thought was, no, this is gonna be like a couple days. And a month passed, and I was like, okay, like I'm gonna move back in by myself. I'm gonna probably end up going back to drinking. And that cycle just kind of continued. I was going to AA meetings. I was starting to do an outpatient rehab. In outpatient rehab, they give you some medication, but it inhibits alcohol from affecting you. If you drink alcohol, it will make you violently sick. And so I remember I had a coworker that passed away, unfortunately, during this time. And that night, I remember I wanted to go and drink so badly. That medicine actually, just the thought of getting sick from that medicine or it not mixing well, stopped me from going and drinking. I ended up living at home with my parents for almost a year. And meanwhile, Ann and I went back and forth. There was talk of divorce. It was very rough because I was like, I'm finally sober. Like, why can't you see I'm doing this? And she's like, you messed up too many times. And eventually we started going to counseling, slowly working through it. I remember the first time we went to counseling, she was not having it. She was like, this is a waste of time. I'm going to leave this guy. He's messed up too many times. I really do not blame her in any way, shape, or form. I had been sober for probably 2 years when we moved back together. I was finally becoming myself again. So she felt like she was almost getting to know the person she first started dating. I was completely starting to get to know myself again because I was not myself for so long. And so dove back into hobbies, woodworking, hiking, photography, like all the stuff that I used to love to do and stopped doing because alcohol was more important. And so now her and I, we still do counseling periodically. We try to every Tuesday night do like I've got it in my calendar, like Ann and Dustin therapy. Basically, we sit on our couch and we have a therapy session together. We just talk through things because we're like, we need to talk. Sometimes the weeks are so stinking busy that we don't have time to talk. And so this is our hour that we set aside to talk through whatever it is it might be. Except for like work, like household chores or personal work or anything like that. We just talk through things. And so communication with us, ever since we got back together, has been huge. About 2 months ago, we're going through IVF right now, and we did the egg retrieval, and I hit an absolute wall afterwards, and I felt like I was gonna slip. It was just a wall I never expected. I was strong through the whole thing and able to support her through the whole thing, and then the second we did egg retrieval, I dropped like a stone, and all I wanted to do was drink. And telling her that that's where I was at is one of the huge things that saved me, because the old me would have just held it in until I snapped and did go buy a bottle of alcohol. Basically, ever since I got sober, I had a therapist in rehab, and she was giving me all these tools to cope. So she told me to start journaling. So I started journaling. I was also attending church weekly. It was during the pandemic, so I was watching online. So I would kind of put that in conjunction with reading the Bible, with reading a book. So it'd be a combination of like prayer, journaling, and reading the Bible. And that became my meditation. Those three things really allowed me to just silence all my thoughts, silence my anxiety, silence everything, and actually be able to hear God to the point to where I could take his guidance. I continue to journal. Journaling's been huge. I will always recommend that. And pray and meditate and read and just give myself time to decompress. And there are definitely times, like I actually stopped journaling for a while because I felt like I wasn't getting as much out of it. And then I feel like I can't control my emotions as well. And I'm like, all right, I got to go back to this. Me playing video games in the evening is not doing me any good. My hobbies are a huge thing, because there are definitely times where my mind is so active, I can't even get through a conversation with God. And so I'll go out and do woodworking or go on a hike or something along those lines. Nature really helps me decompress. I know that I'm slipping with my mental health or substance abuse when my patience becomes low. When I don't have the capacity to handle what I normally can. And you see the habits, the rhythms over time, and you can pick up on it. You just have to train yourself to catch those. And so it takes work. Solitude does tend to help me a lot. But there also comes a point where solitude does the exact opposite and you get lost in your thoughts. And that's where my wife comes into play. I mean, my wife is always there, but Anne is my go-to. And she can help me work through stuff. So it's always good to have time to process, but I have to talk through it at the same time. I'm very fortunate that I've got a lot of coworkers I can open up to about it. If my wife ever gets tired of hearing me complain, which I know happens, I've got an awesome support group. And the only way you can get that support group is by opening up to others. My faith got incredibly stronger. Like that relationship was gone when I had crazy lows or was just incredibly desperate to get sober. It was like pleads for help. And that was the extent of my faith. In the moment, it was like, God, why are you doing this to me? And in hindsight, he knew that's what it took. He knew he had to bring me basically to the brink of dying for me to wake up and pay any attention. He knew I had to lose the relationship with my wife, with friends, with just about everybody, to actually have a wake-up call. And so I credit God for my sobriety, for being here today. And that relationship has just continued to strengthen over time. There are definitely moments where things are hard and I, go back to why God, but it's nothing like it was before because I'm talking to him day in, day out. Just always asking for guidance and peace, because with his presence comes peace. I never thought I'd be working in a church, and here I am. What I would recommend if you're struggling with mental health is to not hide or deny your struggles and to seek help. It does not mean you're weak in any way, shape, or form. That help will carry you through it. The things that make you think you're broken, because you're not broken.
Welcome to the post-story discussion of I'll Start. We are really excited to kick off season 2. This portion of the episode is where we share mental health tools and theological insights to really connect our faith and mental health. My name is Morgan Arsenault, and I'm here alongside my co-host and dear friend, Heather Kalipek.
Hey, everybody. Today's post-story discussion is diving into Dustin's story.
Yes.
And his experience, after reflecting on that experience of just sitting across from him while he was sharing that with us, what stands out to me is shame, and how shame can be really loud and really persistent. Dustin identified that shame and what it sounded like for him because he named so honestly that belief that he is a loser and that he was not fit for society. And when we carry those kind of beliefs, those shaming beliefs about ourselves, it keeps us isolated from others. And that is where shame does its deepest damage, is in secrecy. But here is what we know from research and experience, is that empathy destroys shame. So what does that mean? It means that the cure for shame isn't perfection. It isn't doing everything that we're supposed to do exactly right. And it's even not sobriety, right? Abstaining from the substance that we're addicted to. The cure for shame is connection, because that's where empathy lives. When someone meets our pain with understanding instead of judgment, our brain and our body both register safety again. And when we feel safe, that becomes new soil where healing grows.
That is powerful.
Yeah. So all of this is sort of based off of Brené Brown's research. And she has this phrase that I love. It's called shame resilience. She's researched shame and vulnerability. And so she's come up with this phrase, shame resilience. And what that is, it's about recognizing the shame. You recognize it, name it, and then reach for connection instead of hiding in secrecy, because that's what shame tells us to do. And Dustin's courage to share, even knowing that not everyone will understand his experience, that was shame resilience in action.
Absolutely.
Right in front of us.
Absolutely. It really was an honor to sit and hear him share. I just felt convicted. Right? Dustin talked about how scary it is to open up to people who haven't lived the same struggles. And I think that's true for so many of us. It was hard to hear. It's hard for me to share my story because you don't understand it, and I'm afraid of how you will judge me. And that's a barrier, right? That's a barrier to the healing and the connection that we need. But for the listener, our experiences are real and they shape us, but they don't define us or who God is. And therefore, we can listen with empathy, even if we have not shared the same experience, because our experiences do not define what is true.
It's so true. And, I think that's a myth a lot of times with empathy. You hear people talk about like, oh, well, I've never experienced that, so I can't really understand it. I think that's like a kind of a cop-out because while I may not have experienced exactly in the same way, what you've struggled with, I have struggled, right? And thank God that my ability to empathize or my ability to love other people isn't only based on my own experiences. Right? Or we'd never be able to love anybody who wasn't exactly like us.
Exactly. Yes.
So my experiences don't define who I am or my capacity to love other people, and they don't define who God is.
Yes.
Or his capacity, because if my understanding of grace stops where my experience ends, then I've limited God's capacity for me and for others.
I think of Psalm 40, and it starts out like this. He lifted me out of the pit, out of the mud and mire. I think of that for Dustin's story. Honestly, I think of it for my story. But God does not stand at the edge of our pit shouting instructions, right? He's not there telling us everything we did wrong or everything we should have done better. He meets us there and he lifts us out.
That's such a powerful image. Yeah, God's not standing at the top of the pit being like, well, I haven't experienced what you experienced, so good luck. I think that's so powerful because it's an example of how we can be, because once we've been lifted, we can turn and offer a hand to someone else still in the mud, and that is empathy. And that's what the church can be when that judgment steps aside.
I think that's how we move closer to how Jesus met people, because he didn't minimize their stories. He met them in their mess, and he met them with compassion and also truth.
Yes. And I think that is what shame resilience can look like in a community. It's creating spaces where we can be fully seen and still be safe.
Yes. Sometimes I think we can confuse judgment and discernment because they're not the same thing. Discernment asks, how can I love this person well? And judgment asks, how can I protect myself from their story? Right? And so discernment keeps us connected. And judgment, it can keep us safe, but it's going to keep us alone.
Oh, that's so good, Morgan. My judgment of someone else is really just my own way of keeping myself safe from their story.
Yeah.
Discernment is more about, okay, how can I love this person well, even if their experience isn't exactly mine? And I think, an example of this was Dustin naming the role AA had as this judgment-free zone.
Yes.
And I think that is something that, as the church, we can learn from, because people heal when they feel safe enough to be honest.
Yes.
And that's what that connection was. That was, I can connect, I can say these things out loud with people because they won't judge me. And if we, as the body of Christ, can become that kind of safe place where confession, saying things out loud, leads to compassion, instead of just condemning people and judging people, then stories like Dustin's become a bridge and not a barrier to people coming to church.
Yes. And the idea of confession, right? It's very biblical, but I think sometimes we think it's for God, but really confession is something that is for us.
We don't say these things out loud to each other or to God for him.
Right.
God already knows what we did. When we're confessing, he already knows everything we've ever done and everything we ever will do. So, it's not for him, it's a practice for humans. It's a practice for our hearts to admit and to say out loud what we have done. And then if we want forgiveness, all we have to do is ask.
I love that. I think that confession and the forgiveness we receive from that, it gives us kind of what Psalm 40 says, it gives us a new song. You know, God doesn't just lift us out of this pit. He gives us a new song to sing. And it goes on to say in Psalm 40, He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. This is praise born out of pain and struggle. And I think the more we share those songs, right, the more other people will begin to believe. They will see it, that healing is possible, and it is possible for them too.
It's so beautiful. And so if you're listening today and you're wrestling with shame or judgment, start by naming the shame, then reach for one safe person and tell the truth. That's where resilience begins.
And wherever you are in that process, know this, that God has not turned away from your pit, and your story matters deeply to God.
Yeah, so take a moment today to just ask yourself, where am I still hiding because of shame? And what would it look like to let someone see me right there? We're right here with you, starting that conversation together.
Friends, thank you for joining us for Dustin's story. We look forward to having you with us for our next episode of All Start.